How They Croaked by Georgia Bragg. Edgar Allan Poe. Poe attended a lot of funerals. When he wasn't going to funerals, he wrote stories about dead people, or soon to be dead people, living in torture chambers, haunted houses, and other creepy locales with zero chance of escape, like in The Pit and the Pendulum, or The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Murders in the Rue Morgue. His stories start out with lines like, I was sick, sick unto death, with that long agony. And that's the cheery part. Misery, loneliness, and death are the grim themes of his work and of his life. Lots of bad stuff happened to him, and then he died. Poe's major woe started when his dad split, leaving Poe's ailing mother and 3 small children on their own. By the time Poe was 3, his mom had died of tuberculosis. He watched her cough up blood and waste away. Little Poe sat in a room with his mom's dead body for a few days until it was taken away and buried. After that, he slept with the covers over his head because he thought a dead person would come get him in the middle of the night. Abandoned and orphaned, Poe was separated from his brother and sister and raised by foster parents, Fanny and John Allan. Fanny loved Poe, but John hated his guts. Poe grew to have a large forehead, a brooding stare, and a gift for words. When Poe was 15, his first girlfriend dropped dead of tuberculosis, just like his mother. By the time he was 20, he'd gone to college, dropped out, joined the army, dropped out, and published his first book of poems. Writing became his life's work. Then stepmom Fanny started coughing up blood, and she died of tuberculosis. John told Poe to get lost. Poe reconnected with his older brother Henry, but then Henry died of tuberculosis. Poe moved in with an aunt and his first cousin Virginia. He fell in love with Virginia and they got married. It was acceptable in those days. But then guess what? Virginia died of tuberculosis. There was no denying it. Poe was a disaster magnet. Poe used his bad case of the gloomies when he put pen to paper. In 1845, his poem The Raven was published in the Evening Mirror, and it became an instant classic. It turned Poe into a celebrity, and everybody wanted to know him. But it didn't pay the bills, and he was starving most of the time. He was paid practically nothing, and because there was no copyright laws, what he wrote could be freely copied by others. In his whole life, he earned only $300 for all of his writing. Reduced to begging people for help, sometimes he'd send letters to far-off relatives and acquaintances to ask for money. Despite these troubles, Poe miraculously kept writing, but there was another problem. He tried to ditch his troubles by drinking. People expected that when he walked into a room, he would probably be drunk. Or he'd wander the streets missing a shoe, disheveled, and disoriented. A polite word used at the time for drunk. Though he tried many times, Poe couldn't keep a paying job. He pursued a couple of wealthy women in the hopes of finding love and security, but being a drunk is not that attractive. People avoided him like the plague. My life seems wasted. The future looks dreary, blank, Poe wrote to his aunt. Desperate, he left Richmond, Virginia to head to New York City on a wild goose chase in pursuit of work. Poe's first stop was Baltimore, where he accidentally walked off with someone else's cane and lost his luggage. And then, for the next 6 days, Poe completely vanished. There is no record of where he was or what he was doing, and for a relatively famous man, that was hard to do unless he was drunk face down somewhere, which was very possible. On Election Day, Poe showed up at a bar called Ryan's Fourth Ward polls in Baltimore, so named because it was used as an election polling place. He was a wreck. He was disoriented. His vest and neckcloth, like a tie, only wider and tied differently, were gone. And he was wearing someone else's filthy clothes inside out and backwards. It was a complete coincidence that two opposed distant relatives came into the bar. They didn't have any fond family memories. Poe had been drunk and belligerent the last time they saw him, and it looked like he was at it again. They dragged his limp body out of there and dropped him at the hospital so he could sleep it off in the drunk ward. At the hospital the next day, Poe was jumpy and agitated. He was talking, but it was all gibberish. The doctors assumed he was still drunk. Overnight, he became less erratic, but the next morning he still wasn't making sense. He should have sobered up by then. The doctors offered Poe water to drink, but he wouldn't take it. Poe woke up the next morning delirious and began calling out the name Reynolds. He blathered about Reynolds until 3 the following morning. Then Edgar Allan Poe died. It was October 7th, 1849, and he was only 40 years old. The cause of death was given as congestion of the brain, which was a common medical phrase at the time that explained practically nothing. Over the years, everybody assumed that Poe had died of alcohol poisoning. But how could he have still been drunk after not drinking a drop for 4 days in the hospital? Recently, doctors re-examined Poe's medical records. It's possible a rabid animal had bit him. He refused to drink water at the hospital. People with rabies are unable to swallow water. And people with rabies also act like they're, drunk, which would explain why he didn't sober up. The penniless Poe might have been part of a voter fraud scheme right before he died. Potential voters at the time were kept in rooms where they could change into various clothes and then go into different polling places so they could vote more than once. The payoff was free alcohol. And Reynolds, the name Poe kept calling out at the end, was the name of a polling official. To this day, no one is completely certain if Poe died of rabies or of something else. But one thing seems clear. Poe wanted to take his place in the realm of the dead in a big hurry. After all, everybody he had ever loved was already there.